Hey guys, Will here. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Cube Controls GT-X2 sim racing wheel. Now this comes in at the premium end of the market where it faces some pretty hot competition. Having said that, it does have some pretty unique features as well though. So what we're going to be doing in today's video is unpacking this in all its detail and finding out whether this might be the right sim racing wheel for you. So let's get into it. So quite a bit of stuff to get through in today's video, but before we do dive into it, firstly, a couple of quick housekeeping things just so you have the full context of exactly what we're doing here today. So firstly, big thank you to Cube Controls for sending across this wheel for us to check out. Now, we will be cross-comparing this wheel against some other options. By no means every single option available on the market, but some of the other wheels that we've tested over the years here at Boosted Media. So it's important that you guys are aware that all the wheels that we will be comparing to have all been provided to us under the exact same conditions. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see in today's video, we will have some affiliate links available down in the description box below. We don't have an affiliate partnership with Cube Controls directly like we do with some other brands, but we do have a couple of reseller partners which are good options. Now, as is always the case, it does pay to shop around, make sure you're getting the best possible price in your particular location. But if you do want to help support us at no additional cost, that is an awesome way of doing so. So check out the links down in the description below if that's something that you would like to do, and we really do appreciate your support there. But let's move on now and start off by talking about some pricing information with this particular wheel. So the GT-X2 has a starting price of €1,365. Now that doesn't include any taxes or shipping import duties and whatnot. So again, as I mentioned earlier, make sure that you do shop around and make sure you're getting the best possible price in your particular location. That is the starting price. There are a couple of accessories and options which we'll get into in just a moment. But to give you a point of comparison here, to begin with, the CSX3, which we reviewed previously, and we do have detailed review videos of all the wheels that we're going to be comparing to in today's video. So if you are interested in any of those other options, definitely check those out. I'll link them down in the description below for you guys. So this guy comes in at pretty much exactly the same price, and we'll do some comparisons between the two later on to help you determine which one might be more suitable for you. Then if you want to talk about other brands, just a couple of the ones that we reviewed recently, if you look at the Solpec Spectra XR wheel, this was very, very highly rated by us. We were actually really impressed with this particular wheel. This guy comes in around about €150 more expensive than what you're paying for the GT-X2. Similarly as well, if you look at something like the Fanatec M4 GT3 wheel, this, as you guys would know if you've seen the review video, is the genuine wheel that you'd find in the real life race car. Whether or not that's important to you is another matter, but this guy obviously has a lot less functionality than what we're getting in here, and this also costs about €150 more than what you're paying for this particular wheel. But we'll get into some material comparisons and whatnot a little bit later on as we get through today's video. Now, in terms of options for this wheel, there are a couple of interesting things here. Firstly, you'll notice the painted surface around the bottom here. Now, I wasn't sure when we first unboxed the wheel whether these were snap-in panels that you could replace if you wanted to change colors. Unfortunately, they aren't. It is just a masked area of the wheel that they've painted over, and there is actually a little bit of overspray and a few little rough areas in the paint, which we'll get into later on as well. But you do have the option when you're ordering the wheel of just straight black, which is unpainted. That comes in at the base price previously mentioned. Then you also have the option of a green, a red, or a white, like what you see here. And it appears to be some sort of an automotive paint with a slight metallic fleck in it, which actually looks really nice. But if you want to go for the green, the red, or the white option like what you see here, you're looking at €50 extra. And then we also have a couple of additional grips as well, which is really cool. So when you order the wheel, you can choose whether you want to have a 300mm or a 320mm diameter. You don't pay any extra if you want to go up to the 320, which is a good thing, but unfortunately they don't ship the wheel with both types of grips. So if you do want to have that interchangeability between the two different styles depending on the different cars that you might be driving, you will have to pay €90 extra to order an additional set of grips on top of the ones that you order with the wheel. So just be aware of that as well. And again, we'll show you the details on how exactly that works as we get on through today's video. And then looking at the back of the wheel, you have this standard hub adapter. If you want to go for an anodized blue version of that, you're going to pay an extra €15. The black one is included in the standard price. So that's a quick rundown on the pricing. Once again, I do want to reinforce the importance of shopping around to make sure you get the best possible price in your particular location. Do be aware that import duties and taxes can vary significantly depending on where you're purchasing from. And again, we do have those affiliate links available down in the description below if you want to help support us. So we really do appreciate that. But let's move on now and talk about what you're getting for the money. So let's circle back here and start off by talking about these grips. Remember, again, you can order with either 300mm or 320mm diameter, and if you want to order additional grips, you can do so for an extra €90, so you can interchange between the two. Now, in terms of interchanging, it is quite simple. There's just 3 bolts on either side, which you undo. The grips then slide off, and you have to replace this little part at the top here as well, because it's a slightly different shape. Now, unfortunately, on the wheel that they sent us and the grips that they sent us, they accidentally sent us two left-hand side pieces for the 320mm diameter grips. So in the driving footage, you'll notice when I'm driving with the 320mm diameter, one of those pieces is missing. Obviously, somebody's just made a mistake when they ship those out to us. So hopefully nobody else has that same problem, but I'm sure if they do, that's something that they can easily rectify, and they'll just send out the new part. So not a major complaint there, just a little minor frustration, but I just wanted to explain the reason why you'll notice one of those is missing in our footage. So yeah, 3 bolts to undo the grips. Very simple to just slide the new ones in. You might find that you have to push in a little bit on the grip just to get the screw to, or the bolt to line up correctly. You do have to be careful because it is aluminium. You don't want to cross thread and cause any damage to the grip. So just make sure you've got it pushed in far enough that those threads do line up correctly, and you're not going to cause any damage there. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what's the driving experience like between the 320 and the 300mm diameter? Now, the wheel isn't as heavy as a lot of other wheels that have this kind of a feature set. Weighs in at about 1.4 kilograms without the quick release mounted. So it's not so heavy that even with sort of a wheelbase down to about 10 Newton meters of strength, you're not going to notice a massive amount of damping effect from the weight of the wheel, the rotating mass. You will notice the force feedback feels a little bit more dampened with the larger diameter grips, but the wheel's also going to feel a little bit less twitchy in your hands as well with the larger grip. So it really is just kind of come down to what you're spending most of your time driving. I would recommend, if you're spending this kind of money on the wheel, you probably want to order those additional grips as well, just so you can interchange between the two. I found that this wheel is actually perfectly fine to drive with cars like F1 cars, for example, those more Formula style cars, even though it is a GT style rim at the 300mm diameter. But for the more GT style cars, I actually did prefer driving with 320mm diameter grips. As I said, didn't really find that it had a massively significant impact on the force feedback feeling overall, didn't damp it down too much, but just gave me a little bit more sensation of control in the car. And I just found that I wasn't over driving the car quite as much with the larger grips as I was with the smaller ones. But I think you'll find, regardless of the grips that you choose, you'll ultimately adapt to it and you won't have any problems. But yeah, I did find the ability to interchange between the two different grip styles quite useful. Probably not something that you'll ultimately end up doing every single time you change between cars, but if you're deciding that you want to race in a particular series for, say, a whole season, you might want to change across to 320, for example, and then change back to 300 when you go to a different series later on. So I think that's probably the scenario where it's going to be worthwhile. And I definitely think having the ability to interchange there for a relatively low cost compared to the cost of having a whole second wheel is definitely a good thing. So a cool little design feature from Cube Controls there. Now, in terms of the grip material itself, I actually really like what they've done here. So this is that rubberized silicone material. I'm not sure exactly what it is. It feels like some sort of a silicone material. Now, you guys have heard me say in a lot of videos with some of the grip material we find on other wheels, like this Solpec wheel, for example, it feels quite clammy and sticky in the hands, particularly when you get sweaty palms. It starts to get quite slippery, and it also has the tendency to pick up dirt, debris, dead skin cells, and whatnot, as well, as you guys have heard me say time and time again in a lot of review videos. Now, I'm happy to say that the grip material they've used here has this kind of almost textured finish on it. It's very fine, but it's a really interesting material. It doesn't have that same stickiness than what we find elsewhere. We've seen this material used on a couple of other wheels recently, notably the Sim Magic wheel as well, the GT Neo, which I was really impressed with. Same kind of material on this guy as well, although this doesn't have quite the same amount of squish as what we have here. So what that means is that it has all the advantages of that rubberized grip material, but without the complaint of it picking up dirt and debris and feeling sticky and clammy in your hands when your palms get a little bit sweaty. So really nice material there. And as I just mentioned as well, it has got quite a nice amount of squish in the material as well, which does make it feel quite comfortable and nice in the hands. If you do have the tendency to death grip the wheel like I do, and it is a bad habit, which you shouldn't do, but a lot of us I know do this. If you really grip the wheel hard, it does feel nice and soft in your hands. There's no hard or sharp surfaces to be found anywhere, and there is plenty of clearance there for your thumbs as well, but we'll get into ergonomics when we get into the driving experience a little bit later on in today's video. So that is the grips. Really impressed with them. I think they've done a really nice job here. The material choice, the design, the ergonomics as well, everything is definitely a thumbs up from me there. So let's move on now and talk about the feature set on the wheel, then we'll circle back and talk about the material choices a little bit later on as we get through. So you've got a 5-inch touchscreen Vocore display here. This has a resolution of 854 by 480 pixels. Not the highest resolution that we've seen on a sim racing wheel, but definitely adequate. And as you can see in the driving footage, even running dashboards with small text like Lovely Dashboard, for example, absolutely no issues whatsoever reading things like leaderboards and whatnot. So the resolution is perfectly adequate. The color reproduction and viewing angles are absolutely fine here as well. So not that you're ever going to be viewing the wheel off center anyway, because it's obviously going to be sitting in front of you on the sim rig, but you didn't get any distortion in the color or ghosting or anything weird going on like that if you kind of go off to the side and look at it that way. Contrast ratio, color reproduction and everything is all really nice on the wheel as well. The colors are nice and vibrant, and the blacks are nice and deep black as well. So obviously not on the same level as something like an OLED display that you'd find on a modern smartphone, for example, but for the context of what it is, I think absolutely fine and adequate. Brightness levels are absolutely fine here as well. In fact, we've actually got it turned down a little bit for the footage because it was so bright that it was actually flaring out on the camera. So no issues with brightness adjustment there. So that's a quick rundown on the hardware of the dash. We'll come back and talk about the software and what you can actually do with that as we get on through today's video. So then if I quickly flick on these LEDs around the outside for you as well, you can see here we've got an array of 3 flag LEDs on either side. Now, the wheel is compatible with both their own software, which we'll look at in just a minute, and of course SimHub, so you can use all the integration that you'd find in SimHub. So spotter, flags, pretty much anything you can imagine you can do with these LEDs. And then you've got your RPM strip, which is 15 RGB LEDs across the top here as well. Now, one thing that I did notice is that the color reproduction on these LEDs isn't absolutely fantastic, and there is a little bit of color variation, well, quite a lot of color variation actually across these as well. Now, with the colors that we've got here at the moment, you won't see it too vibrantly, but when we have a strip of just white across the top, I did notice that some of the LEDs looked a lot more warm in their color temperature than others did. There are a couple in particular, as you can see in the footage here, that really jump out. So obviously that's going to vary from wheel to wheel, I would imagine. So if you do happen to own one of these wheels, let us know in the comments down below whether you've noticed the same thing. Hopefully it's just my wheel, but maybe they do need to have a little bit of a look at the quality control there and making sure that they are sourcing high quality components and that their manufacturing tolerances are within spec. So while we're on the subject of RGB LEDs, as you can see here, the buttons on the face of the wheel are also RGB LED backlit as well. So you can completely customize this through SimHub or just customize the basic colors through their own CubeSet software, which we'll look at later on as well. But to give you an idea here, you do have control through SimHub of all of these LEDs. So you could make various different buttons respond to button presses, different modes that you have the car in. You could even have them light up or flash as a spotter. Basically, your imagination is the only limit there. Now, one thing that I will just quickly mention here is that there is 4 individual LEDs around these rings that you see on these rotary encoder / multi-position switches on the face of the wheel. Now, I couldn't find in SimHub, and I'm not a SimHub expert by any means, so I'm more than happy to be corrected on this one. I couldn't find any way to individually address these LEDs. With some of the other wheels that we've reviewed at around this kind of price point, you can see they do all kinds of funky things, like when you turn the knob, it will spin around the LEDs to signify that you've made a change. I couldn't find any way to do that on this particular wheel, although having said that, I did notice that if I adjust the brightness here, you'll notice that it is actually addressing these with different colors. So yeah, I'm not 100% certain exactly what the story is with that, but have a read through the comments down below. I'm sure somebody smarter than me will be able to correct me and inform you guys. So that's pretty much everything you need to know in terms of the hardware side of things for lighting. We will touch on this again when we go through the software a little bit later on in today's video. So that's all of the outputs covered. Let's now talk about the inputs, starting with these buttons. Now, these are the same buttons that we find on the AMG wheel from Cube Controls that we reviewed recently, and I really like these buttons. I can't stress this enough. They feel a lot nicer than the buttons that you get on the CSX3 wheel, subjectively of course, but these have a much firmer kind of snap to them, so you don't get any squish at all in the button before it actually activates and clicks into position. And they feel a little bit more plasticky and a little bit less tactile, I guess you could say, than what we have on the GT-X2. So these buttons have quite a lot more squish there. They don't rattle or move around excessively or anything like that. There's no rattling when you shake the wheel or anything like that, but they've got a really nice cushioned kind of press, and you can see how much movement there is in the button there before it clicks, as opposed to here where it's much more of a snap. So yeah, I'm really, really impressed with these buttons. I would definitely rate these buttons right up there with the best of the best in terms of feel. And you have 10 of those buttons across the face of the wheel. So then moving on, we've got 2 7-way funky switches here, which is something I always like to see. I like to assign one of those for navigating through my menu and then the other one for navigating through my black box, depending again on the sim that you're running, of course. But you can, of course, assign one of those to maybe look around the cockpit, whatever you want to do with it. It's great that they have 2 of those there. Nice blue anodized knobs on both of those. And in case you're not familiar with what a funky switch is, I shouldn't just assume that people know. It gives you rotary encoder functionality, so you can turn in either direction. You can push to the right, to the left, up, down, and push button functionality as well. So a lot that you can do with these switches. We do find those on most sim racing wheels around this kind of price point these days, but yeah, really great that they have 2 of those there, and they do have a really nice feel as well. So you can see there's a little bit of a spring-loaded mechanism there. It's not an analog switch, so it doesn't actually activate until you click it in each position, and there's a good amount of resistance in the rotary encoder function as well. So with or without gloves, it's got a nice tactile feel to it. No complaints there at all with regards to the 2 7-way switches. You've got 2 thumb encoders here as well, standard ones as you would find on any other Cube Controls wheel. So a good solid detent or click in each position there. You're not going to have any issues with accidentally moving this more clicks than you intend to. Another thing that I really like that they do include with their wheels is the ability to adjust the pulse width modulation in their software as well. So that basically allows you to adjust the sensitivity. So if you're finding that one click is moving you more than one setting inside the sim, you can increase that value or decrease it if you're finding that it's not sensitive enough. So no complaints with the thumb encoders there. 3 rotary encoder switches on the face of the wheel here as well. Good solid clicks in each position with these 2, exactly the same as what you'd find on any other Cube Controls wheel. So yeah, they feel exactly the same as the CSX3, for example. I will quickly mention here though, if we compare it to the Fanatec M4 GT3 wheel, although I wasn't a big fan of the plastic used for the touch points here, although I was quite aggressively reminded in the comments on the review video for this guy that they're doing that for weight saving purposes. Remembering again, this wheel is used in the real life GT3 M4. These buttons do actually have a nicer snap in each position than most other sim racing wheels that are around this kind of price point. So I was really impressed with the feeling of those. The buttons on this guy, just for comparison while we've got it here, don't feel quite as nice as they do on this wheel. They feel a lot more like what we have on the CSX3, just to give you the point of comparison there. But yeah, look, these are absolutely fine. One thing I did notice is they do have a little bit, it probably looks worse on camera than it actually is, to be honest. It's not something you notice when you're driving, but there is a little bit of wobble there in those encoders. So maybe that's one little thing that they could improve on, but yeah, not a major deal breaker or anything like that. Most important thing there is that they've got a nice solid click in each position, and with or without gloves, you're not going to have any problems operating them whatsoever. So then on the face of the wheel, the last 2 things to talk about here are these 2 little toggle switches, which you can see here do actually have some backlight, so you can activate those on or off. You can't actually adjust the color of those backlights, so it is set at the color that you see there. And look, these are just basic toggle switches. I like the fact that they've got a bit of a shell around them here as well to protect them a little bit so they don't get broken off if you bump them by accident. And I was actually using these for activating my headlights and my windscreen wipers in game. And that's worked absolutely fine for me, just like what it has on the CSX3. And you can see these buttons are a little bit more recessed, which makes them even more protected, which is a good thing. But yeah, I found that to be quite useful, and yeah, it works quite nicely. One thing just to be aware of there is that it does send a momentary pulse when you flick it on or off. So if you say, for example, start the sim with the switch in the on position, then you'll have to flick it off to switch the lights on, and vice versa. So you want to make sure that it's in the off position when you jump into the car. Not a deal breaker, but just one little thing to be aware of. So that is all the buttons, inputs and outputs on the face of the wheel. Let's flip the wheel around now, talk about a couple more buttons that we find on the back, as well as the shifters and the analog paddles. So having a look at the back of the wheel now, you'll notice these 2 toggle switches in either position, which are actually very conveniently placed for triggering things like ERS, DRS, for example, or brake magic if you're Lewis Hamilton, although I'm sure he wouldn't want to talk about that. So you can knock these with your finger in either direction, and they actually feel quite nice. What I don't like about these is just how flimsy and vulnerable they are. Now, unlike what we have on the face of the wheel where you can see these are protected, as we talked about just before, these have no sort of protection whatsoever. And look, honestly, I think that these are far too vulnerable. I think it's only a matter of time before the wheel spins in your hands, maybe in a crash or something, and you catch one of those and break it off. Now, again, I'm happy to be corrected. Let us know in the comments if you own one of these wheels, whether you've had something like that happen. But yeah, it definitely stands out to me as, at the very least, a vulnerable point on these wheels. So yeah, I think they probably could have done better there. I do like the fact that it is a 2-way switch, so you do get 2 functions in each position, unlike what you have again with the Solpec wheel, which just has push buttons in either position, or even with the Fanatec wheel, you can see this also has push buttons. But yeah, obviously this kind of design is a lot less vulnerable. So maybe something like a flat rocker switch might have been a better choice there. But moving on now to the shifters. Now these are the same R-Spec Pro shifters as we find on the CSX3, for example. Contactless Hall effect sensors in these as well. So they are easily calibrated through the software, but that does away with a mechanical switch, which has the advantage of not taking on dirt debris over time and potentially wearing out or misshifting. And look, we haven't had any issues at all with the more modern Cube Controls wheels. If you go back to the original GT-X wheel, which we'll probably take a little bit more of a look at as we get through today's video. I did have a few issues with misshifts with this wheel. The calibration for this guy was a little bit more complex, so definitely some improvements that they've made stepping up to the GT-X2. Magnetic paddles here as well, so they've got a nice snap to them. And one thing that I've always liked about Cube Controls Pro shifters is the adjustability that you have here, although that has come in the past at the cost of the potential for things to slip out of alignment or move around when you're driving. And that is a problem that I've experienced on a couple of their wheels in the past. Now you'll notice here, we've got 3 individual points of adjustment. So you've got the simple one, which is just the ability to slide the paddle in and out across the groove here. As you can see, about 15 millimeters of adjustment there on both the analog paddles and the shifter. So it allows you to move the paddle in and out, pretty self-explanatory. Now we can also adjust the throw here as well. So if we bring the wheel around, you can see this little piece of dowel here, I guess you could call this little spacer, the gold part. You can actually move that up and down as well, and that adjusts the throw. So that basically acts as a bump stop. And the further back you put it, the shorter the throw, the further forward you put it, the longer the throw. So you can see it doesn't look like much movement, but that is in the maximum throw position, and that is the minimum throw position. So it pretty much halves the amount of throw that you have available there, and that is just secured in position. You can adjust it anywhere in between to your heart's content. Now there is also an adjustment here for the position of the paddle itself relative to your hand position, and this is where I've had a few issues in the past with other ones slipping. Now you'll notice on this particular wheel they've got 2 mounting points now, and both of those have a little groove, so you can see you can adjust the position around to your heart's content. On previous models, including the CSX3, if we have a look at the shifters on that, you might not be able to get a good shot with the camera here, but it actually only has 1 bolt that secures it in position. And that is where I've had a few issues, not with this wheel, but with the old GT-X wheel, which I'll show you in just a moment, where even when I tighten that down as hard as I dare to make it, it would still slip and move over time. Haven't had that problem with the CSX3, but I do like the fact that they now have twice as many screws here, 4 points to fix that in position. What I don't like, however, is that it is pretty much impossible to actually make that adjustment on this particular wheel without your own tools. And the reason for that is that the Torx key that they include, at least in my package, looks like that. And you can see how long that piece is. You can't actually get that in there to loosen off those Torx bolts. So I don't have a way without going to a hardware store and trying to find something that has a really short little angle on it to actually get in there and loosen those, short of taking the analog paddles off in order to get to those screws to loosen that off. So a bit of an oversight there. Again, let me know if you've ordered one of these wheels, whether it came with the same Allen key or whether it came with a shorter one. But yeah, when you need a specialized tool to make an adjustment, they should definitely include something that's actually suitable for the job. But just to give you an idea of how that moves, here's the old GT-X original wheel, and basically you can see how much scope and movement you have there. It's a little bit more restricted on this wheel simply because of that second fixture point, but you get the idea of how you can move that around to get it into exactly the position that you want. So that is the deal with the shifters. As I mentioned before, magnetic, they have a nice snap to them, and yeah, no complaints there at all in terms of feel. Calibration is nice and simple, as you'll see later on as well. So let's move on now to the analog paddles down the bottom. Now these can function as a single mappable axis, so you can do the same function regardless of which hand you want to operate. Dual mappable axes as well, so if you want to use it as a throttle and a brake, or maybe a handbrake and a clutch, you can do that as well. Then you also, of course, have a dual clutch function as well, which we'll take a look at in the software in just a moment. In terms of adjustability, we don't have angle adjustment like what we do with the shifter paddles, but we do have the same in and out movement here with the carbon fiber paddles. And we also have a large adjustment here for our throw as well, although just like what I said with the shifters, you can't actually adjust that because you can't get your Torx key in there to make that adjustment. So yeah, very frustrating. I really don't know why they did that, but it is what it is. But look, in terms of the paddles themselves, no flex there. You can see a nice thick 5mm genuine carbon fiber paddle on each of these. Although they do look quite thin, and you can see with the cutout, you would expect there to be a little bit of flex there. In reality, they feel absolutely fine. So no complaints there at all in terms of feel for any of the paddles on the back. And then lastly, a couple more things to cover on the back of the wheel here before we move into material choices. So you can see there is a little power button on the back here, which is a nice addition. This isn't a battery operated wheel. It does need to be connected via USB to operate. It doesn't have Bluetooth connectivity either. Obviously, having a dash built in, you do need to have that physical USB connection, which is the reason why it doesn't have those other connectivity options like what you'll find on some of the other wheels that don't have that. But you do have the power button there. I do like the fact that they've recessed it away inside the housing here, and that's something we're going to talk about in reference to the front of the wheel in just a minute as well, because I like what they've done there. But then down the bottom here you can see their QCon connector, which provides USB data and power to the wheel. That looks like this, and if you're not familiar with it, basically the way it works is it just slips on like so. Has a nice strong magnetic connection there, which is weak enough that if the wheel goes crazy, it will come apart and disconnect the wheel, obviously, to preserve the integrity of the USB cable, but it's certainly not so loose that it'll come apart while you're driving. And I've driven with numerous different wheels now, probably well over 200 hours of driving, I would say, at least, with these QCon connectors, and I've never once had an issue with it becoming disconnected when I didn't intend it to. One little thing that is a possibility with these that you do need to be aware of is that if you do have something metal that gets sucked in to the magnet here, obviously this whole surface is magnetic, so it is a possibility that something ends up getting picked up if you drop this on the ground, like a washer or a screw or something, and shorting out those pins. And obviously if this is connected to your motherboard on your PC, you could risk damaging your computer, which wouldn't be a good time. But again, having said that, I've been running these and I've been pretty slack with just kind of dropping the cable on the ground when I'm not using it, and I've never once had a single issue. So I think good design choices all around there. Just to mention as well, this is using little pogo pins internally, so if you push down on these pins, they are spring loaded, and yeah, no reliability issues at all to speak of there. And then lastly, I should also mention the hub adapter here. So this is my Zero Play wheel side quick release that I've got mounted on here. If you look in behind that, as you can see in the footage here now, there is a standard 6x50.8 or 6x70 millimeter hole pattern on the back of this. That makes it nice and easy to mount any quick release that you want. And I like the fact that they've gone with alternate holes here. So one hole will have a thread and then the next one doesn't have a thread. That means that you can bolt in from either direction. So in my case here with this Zero Play quick release, I have threads on the quick release, so I was able to bolt in from the front using the open holes. If I wanted to go the other direction, if I had a quick release that didn't have threads on it, I could go that direction and it would be absolutely fine. So they've got all bases covered there. Absolutely no complaints there at all with the hub adapter. There is of course also the option of the Cube Controls QRX quick release, which unfortunately I haven't actually had hands on with, so I can't elaborate on. But if you look in behind this quick release here, there's actually a little connector in there that allows you to pass power and data through that QRX quick release without the need to use the QCon cable for those who might want to connect up that way. So let's flip around the front now again and talk a little bit more about material choices, because I think this is going to be a bit of a polarizer for people. Now, we already talked about the rubber grips. We don't need to recover that again. If you're skipping to this part of the video, you can skip back to the very start of the hardware overview where we talked about the grips. So what we have here on the front plate of the wheel is what they call a carbon fiber reinforced polymer, PA66 and CF30, whatever that means. I'm not a materials expert. And the material thickness on this front plate is 2 millimeters. Now, I can tell you that there's absolutely no discernible flex in the wheel itself. And you can see in this footage here where we tested it on the rig, there's no meaningful flex in the rim whatsoever. So rigidity is not a problem at all. Not necessarily an issue because it is a very subjective thing. But to me, this carbon fiber reinforced plastic, it just looks like plastic. And I mean, when you're spending this kind of money on a wheel, maybe that's going to be something that is going to disappoint you. I mean, if you compare it to, I mean, let's start at the top and we'll work our way down. So if we compare to the M4 GT3 wheel from Fanatec, again, this is a slightly more expensive, but similarly kind of price bracketed wheel. And this has got this beautiful forged carbon fiber throughout the entire assembly. And it just looks and feels like something you would find on a real life race car, because it is. Now, if we even go back to the original GT-X wheel, this was a 5mm thick piece of carbon fiber on the faceplate here as well. This was genuine carbon fiber, and then the anodized backplate, which we'll get to in just a moment on this guy as well. But then even, cross comparing against the CSX3, this is a 5mm thick piece of carbon fiber as well, similar to what we had on the original GT-X. And look, I mean, it's not a problem in terms of the structural integrity of the wheel at all. And some people might actually like it. But look, I mean, even if we look at the Simagic GT Neo, this is a similar material, but you can see they've kind of created this forged carbon look to this wheel. And to me, I think it just gives it that slightly more high-end kind of look. You might think that that looks tacky. I mean, it is a very, very subjective thing, but if I'm spending this kind of money on a wheel, I kind of want it to have something rather than just looking like plastic. So let me know what you guys think about that in the comments down below. But I mean, it is a nice clean looking wheel, I guess you could say. But yeah, that's just my subjective opinion. One thing I do really like about this though, is that it's got nice rounded, smooth edges everywhere. So there's no sharp edges anywhere on this wheel, which is great. And I love how they've molded this around the switches as well, which makes it very VR friendly. So you're not gonna be hitting buttons by accident. You can really kind of feel your way around the wheel very accurately. So that's one of the advantages of using a design like this over a carbon fiber faceplate. You can see they did similar with these little raised areas around the switches on the original GT-X, but they've had to use little plastic inserts over the top of the carbon fiber rather than being able to actually mold it into the faceplate because of the nature of carbon fiber, of course. So again, let me know in the comments what you think about that one. Now let's go back to this painted area, because I mentioned before there are a couple of different color options: green, red, white, and then the standard flat black, which is basically just unpainted. Now I mentioned before that in the manufacturing process, what they're doing is they're masking off the black areas of the faceplate and then just painting the area that you want painted. So it's not a snap-in cover that you can replace like I'd hoped it might be. Now the finish on this is actually really nice. If we turn the wheel from side to side a little bit here, and you guys will be able to see it in the B-roll footage as well, it's got a nice metallic fleck to it. It's very similar finish to what you'd find on Duco on a car, for example, like a pearl white kind of color on this particular example. What I did notice, however, is there are a couple of areas around the switch here and along the bottom here on this particular wheel where the finish does feel quite rough. Again, it's not something you're ever going to notice when you're driving, but you know, when you're spending this kind of money on a wheel, you expect the finish to be pretty much perfect, at least I would. But there's a couple of areas where there is a little bit of roughness to the paint finish. I don't know whether it's a flat color and then a clear coat over the top. I think it is just some sort of an enamel though. And you can see there's a little bit of orange peel effect on this side compared to this one. That's nitpicking, but look, from a distance it looks great. Even up close it looks great, but it does have that slightly rough finish on it. So I would have liked it if it was a snap-in panel that you could replace, so you could have a couple of different colors and you could interchange between them if you wanted to, but you know, these are little details. And then if we flip the wheel back around again, let's just quickly talk about the material choices here as well. So we've got a cast aluminium rear housing on here. Again, perfectly rigid and strong, no issues at all with regards to that. Got almost like a crinkle paint finish on this, so slightly textured, which I think looks quite nice. It gives it a nice flat kind of finish as opposed to shiny. I'm assuming that because of that texture, it must be painted rather than anodized, but again, I'm not an expert on materials, so don't quote me on that one, but either way, it's got a nice finish to it. And then for the shifters, we'll just quickly circle back on those again. So aluminium mechanisms, carbon fiber paddles, as we touched on before, and then the cages for these, so these little assemblies here are carbon fiber on the shifters and aluminium on the other paddles. And as we mentioned before, no issues with flex there whatsoever. And then just to quickly run through the shifters as well, we already talked about rigidity and whatnot, but carbon fiber paddles on all of them, 5mm thick. Then you've got carbon fiber cages for the shifters and an aluminium structure within, and you can see the little ball bearing mechanism in the side there as well. So there you have it. That's a quick rundown on the materials. Again, let me know in the comments what you guys think. I know it is a bit of a polarizing wheel in terms of its design. Not everybody's going to be a fan of the look, but I actually think it looks a little bit classy in real life than it did in photos. So I'm actually quite happy with it overall. Let's jump in now, take a look at the software side of things, and then talk about the driving experience. So let's take a quick look at the software side of things now, starting with the Cube Controls CubeSet software. Now this software is responsible for things like firmware updates, as well as calibration of the analog inputs, and also some functionality in terms of RGB lighting on the wheel if you just want to have static lighting. Of course, remembering that if you run SimHub, which I would recommend doing obviously with this wheel, that gives you the full dash functionality and control over all the RGB LED functions, as you'll see in just a minute. But just a quick run through this software. You don't have to have it running in the background for the wheel to work. You can kind of just program everything, get it all set, and then just run SimHub from that point forward. But as I mentioned earlier, we've got the encoder pulse width adjustment here that allows us to adjust the length of the pulse every time we move one of the encoders. We've got the calibration for our analog paddles here as well. So it's as simple as you literally just click on the button, pull the paddle to its maximum, release it back to its minimum, and hit save. And you can see now that is going from minimum to maximum, exactly the same for the left-hand side as well. We can save the settings here just as you would expect. We can go down to the RGB lighting. So this is where we would set up our static lighting. So very similar to what we see on a lot of other sim racing products with RGB lighting. You can click on each individual button and set up a color from here. So if we wanted to go off, for example, we could go black, and then when we hit OK, you should see that light will switch off, and so forth. I'm just going to set it back to white for now. There we go. Save setting, and that is committed back to the settings. Now you can see here, hopefully the camera can pick it up, how there is a slight variation in the colors across that RPM strip at the top there, even though they are all set to white in the software. So yeah, just be aware of that as we mentioned before. So that's how you would set the colors for each individual LED. You can then also set colors here for the entire wheel at the press of a button across these presets as shown. So pretty cool functionality there. We'll go back to white. Go down to paddles now, we can see the adjustments for our clutch. So with this disabled, the two paddles operate independently of each other and can be mapped as individual axes. Now, I remember I said earlier on the video, based on their literature, that you could also assign it to a single axis, so you could use either hand. I don't actually see how you do that in the software, and I did investigate this while I was up and driving on the rig earlier. I couldn't find a way to do that, but they say that you can, so maybe I'm missing something there. But either way, moving on to the bite point clutch now. So you can set your left or your right paddle as the primary, and you can also adjust your bite point as well. So you can imagine if I'm holding the wheel and I'm about to launch the car, release my left hand first, that's going to get me to my predetermined bite point, and then I can release the rest of the clutch from there. If I flip that around the other way, then I would release my right hand first, then release my left hand. So cool that you have the ability to choose either hand there. It is worth mentioning, a lot of other wheels these days, you don't actually have to set a primary and a secondary paddle. It just knows based on which hand you release first what you're trying to do, and it kind of just figures it out from there. So maybe a few opportunities there to bring things forward, particularly when you compare this to what we saw in the Solpec Spectra XR. If you go back and have a look at the review of that, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, where you can actually make all these adjustments through the screen itself via a plug-in into SimHub, which you can't do on this particular wheel. So a bit of improvement opportunity there, I would say, for Cube Controls to bring it up on par with what we've seen with some other brands recently. We can assign a rotary encoder for adjustment of our bite point, which is cool though. It means you don't have to Alt-Tab out of your game to make these adjustments. So what you would do is you would click on Assign Rotary Encoder, and then say we want to assign it to this middle one. We'd simply rotate that encoder. And now this makes it so it's no longer mappable inside the game. And instead, when we rotate that, you can see the percentage go up in 1% increments, up and down. So some other wheels these days, including the Solpec Spectra XR, you actually have a coarse and a fine adjustment, so you can use two different knobs to go 10% or 1% increments. But I think this works absolutely fine. It would be nice to have some sort of visual representation on the screen to see what adjustment you're making. Although you could, of course, if you have your telemetry visible inside your game, hold your foot on the clutch and turn the dial to see where the clutch level is inside the game. But I do like having a visual representation on the screen, or using the RPM strip as what we see on some other wheels. So yeah, improvement to be had there as well, I would say, compared to some of their competitors. Shifters, this is very simple calibration as well. So we simply just click on calibrate, pull our left shifter, hold it in position, click, and then release. And that has calibrated our shifter now with that Hall effect sensor. So again, we click on save settings. Then under device, we have the ability to update our firmware. Went through that process, didn't have any issues. And then on about, just shows us the firmware version, the version of the software, and a Cube Controls logo. So that is the Cube Controls CubeSet software. Remembering again, you don't actually have to have this running in the background at all times unless you want to make use of that bite point adjustment. Otherwise, you don't have to run this, and everything's just mappable inside the game. So I'm going to fire up SimHub now, and we'll go through some of the stuff that you can do there. Now, this is by no means going to be completely exhaustive. I just want to give you a top-level overview of some of the things that you can do. So we'll get that loaded up quickly now. And there we go. We can see straight away the wheel fires into action with the presets that I've got determined here. So inside SimHub, if you haven't used this software before, extremely powerful piece of software. It is donationware, so it is free to use. There are a few limitations with regards to the refresh rate of the data if you don't have the paid version, but definitely worth a couple of dollars it costs to support the developers of this. It's an absolutely brilliant piece of software, and it's come in leaps and bounds, in particular in the last 6 months or so, with really kind of making things a lot easier than they used to be. So if it's your first time firing up the wheel, you go to devices and click on add new device and choose the GT-X2 wheel. You can see we've already got the profile loaded in here. And then from there, you've got the ability to make adjustments to your LCD, choose which dashboard you want it to default to when you fire up. So you can load as many dashboards in here as you want. Lovely dashboard in particular is a fantastic one that you'll see me using in a lot of the driving footage in today's video. They do have their Cube Controls profile, as you see here as well, which you can download from their website and import here. So look, their Cube Controls dashboard is a little bit limited, but you can use any dashboard you want, so it's not really a problem. So then if we go across to LEDs, this is where you would set up your profiles and whatnot for the LEDs on the wheel. And that's split into two individual profiles, one for the RPM and and flag LEDs, and one for all of our buttons, as you can see down here. So we've got button lighting and RGB LEDs. So out of the box, this will just be running default profiles. You can download third-party profiles from the likes of, say, Daniel Newman, for example. He makes some really fantastic profiles for the CSX3 wheel. I don't think he's released one just yet for the GT-X2 at the time that we're releasing this video, but you can definitely check him out. I'll drop a link down in the description below for some of his profiles, which do some really cool things. But as I was describing earlier in the video, if you go through here and go into editing of the profiles, you can set up all sorts of effects and triggers. So if we go add effect, for example, you can see here all the various different triggers that you can use for when a light turns on. So you can use them as spotters. You can even have the RPM gauge go around the wheel if you wanted to. Really, the sky's the limit, as we were discussing before. And likewise with the flag LEDs and RPM strip as well. You can make adjustments to suit individual cars if you want to. You can set up all sorts of different triggers for how you want these to operate. If I quickly open up the test data here and drag this across, you can see here engine RPM, fuel level, all kinds of different triggers here for assist as well. So you can have the flags flash, for example, when ABS kicks in, or traction control, when DRS is active or enabled, our flags down there as well, and even spotter, as you can see down the bottom here as well. So that's all the detail I really want to go into for today. So pretty much the same as what we see with most SimHub compatible wheels these days, with the exception of a few like the Solpec Spectra XR, for example, where you actually have a plug-in that allows you to make all sorts of adjustments to wheel settings from the wheel itself, and have that actually relayed to you. So the adjustments that you're making relayed to you through the display. So a little bit more advanced on some other wheels these days. I feel like things have kind of come a big step forward in the last 6 months or so with regards to some of the cool things that you can do with SimHub. But all the primary functionality is there, and I don't think anybody's going to be disappointed with the functionality. I just want to make sure that you guys are aware that there are some other wheels on the market now that do a few extra things. And again, you can check out our reviews of those wheels for all the information on that. So I think that sums up everything you need to know in terms of software at a top level. Let's dive in now and talk more about the driving experience. So hopefully by this point in the video, you've got enough information that you can make a well-informed decision about whether you think this wheel is going to be suitable for you or not. If that is the case, please do scroll down quickly and hit that thumbs up button so that we know that you've found the video up to this point helpful. What I want to do from this point forward in the video is share some of my observations personally, some of my subjective opinions on what this wheel is actually like to drive with. So we'll start off with the good points. Firstly, I was actually really surprised by just how comfortable this wheel is to drive with. Whether that's with the 320mm diameter or 300mm diameter grips. The rubber that they've used here, very, very comfortable. The contours that they've worked in are very comfortable for my hands as well. I've got quite skinny hands, but Tom's got more manly hands than I do, and he didn't have any problems using this wheel either. I think that they've done a really, really nice job here. I would say among the best that I've tested, if not the best, in terms of just the overall feeling of the wheel in your hands. Relatively lightweight for the amount of features that we have here as well, which does retain a little bit more of that force feedback detail if you're running it on a lower force feedback wheelbase. So I'd say regardless of whether you're driving with the 300mm or 320mm grips, this wheel is going to be absolutely fine for anything from about 8 Newton meters upwards, maybe even as far down as 5 Newton meters. That's certainly not something that I would say of a lot of other wheels with this kind of feature set that are a lot heavier and therefore have a lot more damping effect, a lot more rotating mass connected to the wheelbase. So that is definitely a big thumbs up there. And I think that's partly thanks to the material choices that they've made here. And although subjectively, as we mentioned earlier in the video, you may or may not like the appearance of the wheel, in terms of the weight distribution, the lightness of the wheel, I think they've made some really good decisions with this. It feels nicely weighted and centered as well. It doesn't sort of try to spin off to one side or feel top heavy or anything like that. A lot of other wheels, particularly the GT-X original wheel, this wheel actually does feel quite top heavy. You can see even just looking at it like this, the rotating point is in the middle of the wheel, but then you've got the screen that kind of pokes up at the top, and it does tend to make it feel a little bit top heavy compared to this. Now, in terms of the driving experience as well, another thing that I think is really important to call out is the big improvement just in terms of SimHub integration, software integration since the GT-X. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about the GT-X, but if you own one of these wheels, and you can see I've put a lot of usage into this wheel, probably well over 300 hours over the years. You guys that have been watching the channel as far back as the Porsche All-Stars Cup Series years ago would remember I was driving with this wheel back then. One of the things that I absolutely love about all of these modern wheels compared to some of these older ones is the SimHub integration these days. It really is absolutely fantastic. If you remember back to this wheel, this uses Ultimate Game Tech, which is a much more crude, in my personal opinion, way of managing screens. It just doesn't have anywhere near the feature set that we have and the ease of use that we have in SimHub these days. So definitely a big step up just in terms of pure user friendliness there as well, which although isn't related to the actual experience of driving, it's definitely something that you'll appreciate every single time you use the wheel. So definitely worth calling out there. Ergonomically, the wheel is really great as well. No issues at all reaching any of the buttons around here. That goes for both the 300 and the 320 millimeter grips. Obviously, you're going to have to rotate your hands around to get to the center dials here, but that's of course going to be the case with any wheel. Buttons down the bottom are a little bit more difficult to reach, but you can kind of rotate your thumbs around relatively easily. I do really like the design here with the shrouds around some of the buttons as well. Makes it very VR friendly too, which is a good touch. And look, just overall, I mean, subjective preference aside, and the way the wheel looks, whether it's something you like or not aside, I think it's a really well laid out wheel. I love the way that they've integrated these grips so that you can change them very simply. And while realistically, I don't think it's something you're going to be doing multiple times a day when you're switching cars. It does mean that if you plan to drive one specific car for a week or a couple of days even, and then switch back to a different car, you're not going to want to have two separate wheels to do that. You can get by it with just the one wheel, which I think is a really nice touch. The shifters and paddles on the back of the wheel all feel absolutely fine. Only issue we had there was just that the little Torx key that they include in the box, you can't actually fit in to make the adjustments to the position of those paddles as we demonstrated. That's just an oversight, I would say, and hopefully they start including a more appropriate key in the little bag that comes with the wheel. But look, in terms of the rigidity, strength, all those things with the shifters, absolutely fine. No flex there. No flex in the wheel overall either that was discernible when driving. And yeah, overall, I think just a very good all-rounder wheel that's going to suit you for pretty much any sort of GT style driving. Now, to the negative points on this wheel, I think that, for the price, it would have been nice to see maybe some sort of a carbon fiber textured pattern in the faceplate, as I mentioned before, but that is just purely a subjective thing. I am a little bit concerned about the longevity of those trigger buttons that we saw on the back of the wheel earlier. I am a little bit worried that they might catch on your hands or catch on a cable or something and tear off. But again, let us know in the comments down below if you own one of these wheels, whether you've had any reliability issues with those at all. Definitely a point of vulnerability though. But really, those are the only nitpicks with the wheel. Other than that, it really just comes down to value for money. And I mean, as we mentioned before, there are a couple of other wheels on the market now that do have deeper level integration with SimHub that allow you to make adjustments on the fly on the wheel and actually see what's being done on the display itself. You can do that with some of the dashboards, like Lovely Dashboard, as we mentioned earlier. That will give you visual confirmation for settings adjustments based on the telemetry coming out of the sim. But a lot of these modern wheels now actually allow you to make adjustments to the wheel settings specifically and have visual feedback either via the RGB LEDs or on the dashes that they integrate into SimHub. So definitely, I would say, don't just jump in straight away and buy this one based off this review. It's definitely worth having a look at some of those other wheels, having a look at some of the other reviews, and that's going to give you a much better picture of what is going to suit you best. But I think if you are looking at getting one of these, if you like the visual design, if you like the way it looks, then I don't think you're going to be disappointed with it at all. It definitely the driving experience with this wheel has been better than I thought it was going to be in photos. Looking at pictures of it, honestly, it probably wouldn't have ever been a wheel that I would have considered purchasing, but having driven with it for a number of hours now, I'm actually really impressed with it. And I think that's pretty much all there is to say about the Cube Controls GT-X2. So leave a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video. Again, if you do want to pick up this wheel or any of the other wheels that we've talked about in today's video or any other sim racing gear, we do have some affiliate links available down in the description below. That's an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media if you find what we do here of benefit, and it doesn't cost you a cent. So we really appreciate your support there. But above all, as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye.